The Colorado River has a way of stripping a man bare. Its waters don't simply flow, they test. And in the spring of 1919, one man, G.E. Kinkaid, found himself alone on that restless current, his small wooden boat slicing through red silt and sunburnt silence. Kinkaid wasn't just another prospector. He was a veteran explorer, a man with eyes trained to see what others overlooked. He had worked with the Smithsonian, mapped unknown stretches of the American West, and learned that the greatest discoveries rarely shouted, they whispered. That whisper came to him in the echo of the canyon's wind. For days, the walls of the Grand Canyon had towered over him like ancient cathedrals, streaks of gold, crimson, and shadow. Then one afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the river slowed to a glassy calm, something caught his eye. High above the canyon floor, almost impossible to reach, a dark oval shape interrupted the rock face. A hollow, a doorway. At first he thought it was a shadow. But the longer he looked, the more it seemed deliberate. The edges were too smooth, too perfect to be natural. Kinkaid anchored his boat, squinted into the glare, and felt a surge of curiosity that drowned out his exhaustion. He began to climb. The rock tore at his hands. Pebbles skittered down into the abyss below. Every meter he gained, the wind grew stronger, as if the canyon itself resisted him. But Kinkaid was not the kind of man who turned back. He pressed on, driven by the same force that had carried him across deserts and rivers, a hunger for the unknown. When he finally reached the opening, he paused to catch his breath and looked inside. Darkness. A cold breath of air flowed from within. Dry, ancient, almost metallic. He struck a match. The flame flickered against the rough stone, revealing carved steps descending into the mountain. Not a natural cave. This was a passageway, engineered by hands long gone. Kinkaid lit his lantern. The yellow light danced across the entrance, and for the first time, he saw symbols etched into the walls. Lines, circles, forms that looked eerily familiar, yet completely out of place. His heart pounded. No one has been here in 1,000 years. He whispered to himself, his voice swallowed by the hollow silence. He adjusted his pack and took a deep breath. Behind him stretched the endless canyon, vast, wild, indifferent. Ahead of him lay a darkness that could change everything. And so, with one final glance at the blazing horizon, G.E. Kinkaid stepped into the unknown. The moment Kinkaid's boots touched the cold stone steps, the air shifted. It wasn't just cooler, it was heavy, as if the mountain itself exhaled secrets it had guarded for centuries. His lantern light quivered across the narrow walls, revealing tool marks, deliberate, precise. This was no mere cave. The steps led downward in a tight spiral. Dust and silence coated everything, muting the sound of his breath. After several minutes, the staircase widened into a small chamber. Kinkaid stopped, raising his lantern higher. What he saw froze him. The walls were carved with figures, men in headdresses, animals, geometric shapes, and symbols that seemed both Egyptian and Native American, impossible combinations. He ran his fingers across the carvings, tracing the grooves. They were deep and smooth, as though etched with tools far more advanced than what ancient tribes of the region were believed to possess. On the far side of the chamber stood an archway. Beyond it, a vast corridor disappearing into darkness. He hesitated. Every explorer's instinct told him to proceed. Every survival instinct told him to turn back. But Kinkaid had come too far for caution. The corridor was lined with statues, tall humanoid figures with serene faces, hands pressed together in gestures of reverence. The craftsmanship was flawless, unlike anything found in North America at the time. Each statue faced east, as though waiting for something, or someone. As he walked deeper, the light from his lantern flickered across what looked like pottery. Tools and fragments of stone tablets covered in writing he couldn't decipher. Some of the symbols resembled early Sanskrit, others unmistakably Egyptian hieroglyphs. How could this be here? He murmured. At the end of the corridor, he stumbled upon something that sent chills down his spine. A large stone door, carved with an intricate depiction of a man surrounded by rays of light, holding what appeared to be an orb or sun in his hand. The artistry was breathtaking and terrifying. Kinkaid approached cautiously, brushing away dust to reveal a smaller inscription below. The language was unknown, but one symbol stood out: a spiral, repeated 3 times. It looked like a warning. He pressed his hand against the stone. It shifted. A faint rumble echoed through the corridor as the door slid open. Behind it, another chamber. As his lantern illuminated the space, he gasped. The chamber was enormous, at least 200 feet long, with a vaulted ceiling that shimmered faintly as though embedded with crystals. Rows of stone platforms lined the walls, each holding what looked like mummies. Dozens of them. Their faces were calm, their bodies wrapped in linen so well preserved that he could still see the texture of the fabric. Some wore golden bracelets, others intricate headpieces. The craftsmanship was ancient Egyptian, yet here they were, deep beneath the American desert. Kinkaid's mind raced. Had he discovered proof of an unknown civilization, one that linked the old world to the new? He quickly jotted notes, sketching the chamber and its contents. His hands trembled. He knew the magnitude of what he'd found and the danger it represented. Somewhere above him, the Colorado River flowed on, unaware that beneath its canyon, history was about to be rewritten. Kinkaid raised his lantern, once more staring into the endless dark corridors branching beyond. "This isn't just a tomb," he whispered. "It's a city." As the echo of his whisper faded, Kinkaid realized the chamber was not isolated. 3 tunnels extended from its far side, each wide enough for a small cart. The air that drifted from them was dry but breathable, a sign of vast spaces ahead. He hesitated, his lantern trembling slightly in his grasp. Then curiosity took the lead. He chose the middle passage. The corridor sloped downward gently, its walls cut smooth as if by machines, not primitive tools. He paused every few steps to mark his path on the wall, a habit learned from years in the field. But the deeper he went, the stranger it became. Symbols covered nearly every surface. They told stories, if one could read them. Figures kneeling before tall beings with elongated heads. Stars, suns, ships, not on water but in the sky. The resemblance to ancient Egyptian iconography was unmistakable, yet subtly different, as though from an older, forgotten culture that Egypt itself might have descended from. Minutes turned to hours. The narrow passage opened suddenly into an immense gallery. Kinkaid lifted his lantern, and the flame's glow reflected off polished stone columns stretching into the darkness. He took a few steps forward and gasped. Before him stood an entire underground city. Terraces and corridors connected dozens of chambers carved into the canyon's bedrock. The architecture was both functional and majestic, a blend of Egyptian geometry and Native American symbolism. Massive statues lined the walls, each depicting figures holding spheres, staffs, or scrolls. Kinkaid's heart pounded. He approached one of the statues and examined its face. Broad nose, almond-shaped eyes, a calm, almost divine expression. Beneath it, an inscription, "Guardians of the Eternal Sun." The deeper he ventured, the clearer it became that this was no burial site. This was a civilization, one that had lived, worshipped, and died here. In one chamber he found pottery, bronze knives, and beautifully decorated urns. In another, what appeared to be an ancient altar, still stained with pigment, perhaps used in ritual offerings. At the center stood a golden idol, a seated figure, arms outstretched with rays engraved behind its head. The craftsmanship rivaled anything found in Egypt or Mesopotamia. Kinkaid dropped to one knee, overwhelmed. "This changes everything," he whispered. He opened his notebook, scribbling furiously. An underground complex, advanced. Artifacts consistent with Egyptian 4th Dynasty craftsmanship. Possible contact between continents before Columbus? But something in the silence began to bother him. The deeper he went, the more he felt watched. His lantern flame flickered as if disturbed by a breath of air, though the air around him was still. Then came the faintest sound. Like stone sliding on stone, he froze. The sound stopped. Just the echo, he told himself, though his pulse betrayed his fear. He pressed on, determined not to let imagination override discovery. At the end of a narrow hallway, he stumbled upon what looked like living quarters. Small rooms carved into the walls, each with a low bench and a niche for storage. But on one wall, scratched hastily into the stone, was something different, markings newer than the rest. Fresh, as though carved recently, Kinkaid ran his hand across them. The edges were sharp. It wasn't ancient script. It was English. Turned back, he stepped back, his stomach tightening. Someone else had been here recently. Suddenly the corridor behind him groaned. A faint rumble passed through the floor, the sound of rock shifting. He raised his lantern toward the sound, but the light caught nothing but shadows. Still, instinct screamed one thing: he was not alone. Kinkaid steadied his breath, gripping his lantern tighter. What began as an archaeological expedition had turned into something far more dangerous. The city beneath the canyon wasn't just ancient. It was alive, or at least something inside it was. Kinkaid's boots echoed through the tunnel as he advanced, every step stirring the ancient dust of a civilization long buried by time. His lantern cast trembling shadows across the smooth ochre walls, illuminating scenes of celestial beings descending from the heavens, beings offering tools, fire and knowledge to kneeling humans. His breath grew shallow. These aren't mere myths, he thought. They believed they were visited. The corridor opened suddenly into a vast, circular chamber. The ceiling soared beyond the reach of his lantern's glow. As he raised it higher, the flame revealed what looked like a massive dome, perfectly symmetrical, covered in shimmering mineral veins that reflected light like constellations. For a brief, disorienting moment, Kinkaid felt as though he was standing beneath a replica of the night sky. In the center of the room stood an altar, but not a primitive one. It was crafted of smooth black stone, cold to the touch, with inlays of gold forming patterns that resembled circuits or pathways. Around it, 7 statues stood guard, each one nearly 3 meters tall. Their faces were eroded, yet their presence was overwhelming. Each statue held an object, a disc, a staff, or a sphere, symbols of power, knowledge, and eternity. On the floor before them, carved deep into the stone, were concentric circles filled with markings that glowed faintly under the lantern light. As if infused with some phosphorescent material, Kinkaid's scientific mind raced. This can't be pre-Columbian. It's too advanced, too deliberate. He approached the altar and brushed away a layer of dust. Beneath it, an inscription emerged. Not Egyptian hieroglyphs, nor native pictographs. It was something else entirely. He copied it quickly into his journal, unsure if he'd ever decipher it. But something about it felt familiar, a rhythm, almost musical in the arrangement of the symbols. Then, from somewhere deep within the chamber, a faint hum began. It was so low at first that he thought he imagined it. But soon, the sound grew, a resonant vibration that seemed to rise from the very walls. His lantern flame quivered violently. The air thickened, charged with a strange static energy. Kinkaid stumbled back, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. The statues seemed to shimmer in the dim light, their stone faces almost shifting. Then silence. He exhaled slowly, the pounding of his heart filling the void. He forced a nervous laugh. "Just the air currents," he muttered, though he didn't believe it. Still, his curiosity overcame his fear. He walked around the altar, tracing the carvings with his fingertips. Behind it, he noticed something unusual, a panel of stone that looked slightly misaligned. A faint draft seeped through its edges. He pressed against it, nothing. Then, remembering the strange markings on the floor, he stepped onto the innermost circle. A faint click, the panel shifted open, revealing a narrow passageway beyond, and a staircase descending into total darkness. Kinkaid hesitated. His training told him to return, to mark the site and report back. But something deeper, older called to him. A sense that this discovery wasn't just about archaeology, it was about truth. He took a deep breath and began his descent. The air grew colder. The light of his lantern barely pierced the shadows, but the walls glistened faintly, as if lined with crystal. The staircase spiraled down and down, until it opened into a colossal chamber unlike anything he had ever seen. At its center rose a structure, part temple, part machine. Metallic veins ran through its surface, pulsing faintly with light. Suspended above it, a sphere floated in midair, humming with a soft, rhythmic energy. Kinkaid stood frozen. This isn't possible, he approached slowly. On the base of the structure was another inscription, one that chilled him to the core. We came from the stars, and we will return. For a moment, the weight of the realization pressed down on him. The chamber, the technology, the carvings, they all pointed to something beyond human history, something ancient, something not of this earth. He looked around, and in the faint glow, he noticed hundreds of sarcophagi, perfectly aligned, sealed, and undisturbed. Each one bore the same insignia, the symbol of the sun enclosed by wings. Then the hum returned, louder now. The sphere above the altar pulsed once, twice, and began to glow brighter. Kinkaid raised his arm to shield his eyes as the light engulfed him, and then darkness. When Kinkaid opened his eyes, everything was silent. The lantern had gone out. Only a dim, pulsating glow from the floating sphere illuminated the vast chamber around him. His body felt heavy, as if the air itself pressed against his skin. He sat up slowly, head pounding. At first, he thought he'd lost consciousness only for a few seconds, but when he glanced at his watch, the truth sent a chill through him. Over 3 hours had passed. The sphere above the altar still hovered, perfectly still, humming softly. Its light wasn't constant. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Every few seconds the glow would fade, then return stronger, casting rippling reflections across the metallic walls. Kinkaid took a cautious step forward. Something had changed. The inscriptions along the chamber walls were no longer dull carvings. They shimmered faintly, as if responding to the sphere's rhythm. He whispered to himself, "It's reacting." He raised his notebook and began sketching furiously, capturing every detail before the light vanished. But as he moved closer, he felt something strange, a warmth spreading through his fingertips, followed by a low vibration that traveled up his arm. The markings beneath his hand flared briefly, and for a fraction of a second he heard something, a whisper. It wasn't in English. It wasn't even human. But the tone, it felt ancient, like a memory calling from deep within the earth. He stumbled back, heart pounding. Then, from the far side of the chamber, a flash of movement, a ripple of air, like heat distortion. Kinkaid froze. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the steady hum of the sphere, driven by equal parts terror and fascination. He approached the altar again. He placed his hand near the base, where the golden inlays formed a spiral pattern. To his astonishment, the light followed his movement, the spiral glowing brighter wherever his fingers traced. Then the hum deepened. The air grew warmer, and a voice, calm, resonant, and impossibly old, filled the chamber. The guardians sleep. The light remembers. Kinkaid staggered back. The words hadn't come from the sphere, nor from his imagination. They were real, echoing through the walls like the voice of the temple itself. His rational mind fought for explanation, acoustic resonance, psychological illusion. But before he could think further, the sphere began to descend, slowly, gracefully, until it hovered just above the altar. Its surface rippled like liquid, metal revealing faint shapes within, human faces, serene and timeless, as if watching him. He wanted to run. Every instinct screamed for him to leave this place and never return. But he couldn't. This was beyond discovery. It was revelation. He whispered, trembling, "What are you?" The light flared once more, flooding the chamber in blinding brilliance. And for the briefest moment, Kinkaid saw something, not with his eyes, but with his mind. He saw towering cities of gold and glass, rising from oceans that no longer exist. He saw beings walking among men, teaching them, guiding them, and finally vanishing beneath the sands of time. Then darkness again. The light faded. The hum ceased. Kinkaid fell to his knees, gasping for breath. His notebook lay open beside him, pages fluttering in the faint breeze. On one of them, written in his own handwriting, though he didn't remember writing it, were 5 words: "They will awaken once more." He stared at the words, his mind spinning between awe and fear. Was this a vision, a hallucination, or had he just witnessed something humanity was never meant to see? As he rose unsteadily to his feet, he noticed something new. The sarcophagi around the chamber, the ones sealed for millennia, now glowed faintly from within. Kinkaid's breath caught. "No!" The hum returned, deeper and slower this time, resonating through the floor like the pulse of a sleeping giant. He backed toward the staircase, unable to take his eyes off the glowing coffins. Something ancient was stirring beneath the canyon, something that had been waiting. The first tremor was barely noticeable, a faint vibration through the soles of Kinkaid's boots. He froze, staring at the glowing sarcophagi that lined the chamber walls. The faint hum that had filled the air moments ago had deepened into a low, rhythmic pulse, like the slow beating of a heart buried beneath the stone. The light inside the coffins flickered, then stabilized into an eerie golden glow. Dust rained softly from the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, rock cracked with a deep, resonant groan. Kinkaid's instinct screamed at him, "Get out!" He stumbled backward toward the staircase, clutching his notebook and lantern. But the flame inside refused to ignite. As if the air itself no longer obeyed the laws he knew, he took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. "I came here for truth," he muttered. Not for ghosts, but the truth was already unraveling before him. As he climbed, the pulse in the air grew stronger. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding, contracting, alive. The carvings that had once appeared as ancient hieroglyphs now shimmered with liquid light, moving like veins channeling energy through the temple. At the top of the staircase, he turned one last time toward the chamber below and froze. The sphere, the same orb that had hovered above the altar, was rising again. Only now it was splitting apart, fragmenting into smaller orbs that began to drift through the air like glowing embers. Each one floated toward a sarcophagus. As the first orb touched the stone surface, the hum intensified. And then a hand, a pale, slender hand pressed against the inside of the coffin lid, the fingers curling, straining, alive. Kinkaid's heart nearly stopped. He didn't wait to see more. He turned and ran. Up the stairway, through the narrow corridor, the beam of his failing lantern flickering across metallic walls, etched with faces that now seemed to watch him. The ground shook violently. Rocks fell around him as the echo of 1,000 whispers filled the tunnels. Not angry, but mournful, like a chant in a forgotten tongue. When he finally burst into the open chamber where his rope ladder hung, the cool air of the canyon hit him like salvation. But even here, the vibrations followed, the ground pulsing beneath his feet, the walls trembling as if something immense was shifting far below. He climbed as fast as his arms would allow. Each pull felt heavier than the last, his body trembling from exhaustion and fear. Halfway up, he risked a glance down. The light was still visible deep below, a golden, swirling mass expanding outward like a sunrise trapped beneath the earth. Then, a sound unlike anything he had ever heard, a long, deep tone, as if the canyon itself had drawn breath. It resonated through the rock, through his bones, through his very soul. He reached the surface just as the first rays of dawn touched the rim of the canyon. Gasping, covered in dust and sweat, he fell to his knees beside his pack. Behind him, the ground shuddered once more, then fell silent. The light below dimmed, fading until only the cold wind remained. Kinkaid sat there for several minutes, staring into the chasm. His hands shook as he opened his notebook. On the last page, he found something new, a drawing. He didn't remember sketching it, but there it was. A massive figure standing beneath the canyon, its eyes glowing like twin suns, surrounded by what looked like the same orbs he had seen in the chamber. Beneath the drawing were 4 words, written in his own handwriting. "They are waking now." Kinkaid closed the notebook, his mind spinning. Was it hallucination? Contact? Or something humanity had forgotten? A civilization not lost, but waiting? He stood and stared at the horizon, the morning wind whispering across the desert. Somewhere deep below, the pulse continued, faint but steady, and he knew then, with bone-deep certainty, he hadn't discovered a tomb. He had disturbed a slumber. When G.E. Kinkaid finally emerged from the Grand Canyon, he looked less like an explorer and more like a man reborn from the depths of another world. His clothes were torn, his face burned by the desert sun, and his eyes, once sharp and determined, carried a strange, distant gleam. The locals at Marble Canyon remembered him. They said he arrived at dusk, stumbling into the small trading post with a canvas bag clutched tightly to his chest. He asked for food, water, and silence. Over the following days, Kinkaid sent a series of coded telegrams to Washington, D.C., addressed directly to the Smithsonian Institution. His message was clear: ancient subterranean complex discovered. Metallic artifacts of unknown origin. Possible pre-Egyptian influence. Need immediate dispatch of an academic team. Then for several days, there was nothing. No reply, until one morning a black car arrived at his hotel. 2 men stepped out, suits pressed, faces expressionless, bearing the insignia of the Smithsonian's Department of Anthropology. They introduced themselves politely. They congratulated him, and they asked for his notes. Kinkaid hesitated. Every instinct in him screamed that something was wrong. But they were from the Smithsonian, the very institution he had trusted all his life. So he handed them his journal, his sketches, and even a small artifact he had brought from the site, a metallic tablet engraved with symbols that no known culture had ever used. The men examined it silently. Then they left. That night, Kinkaid's hotel room was broken into. His spare notes, gone. His camera, smashed. Even his field maps had disappeared. He wired Washington again. No response. He wired the Smithsonian. No record of his first message existed. Days turned into weeks. Then the Arizona Gazette published a story. Explorer discovers lost Egyptian city in Grand Canyon. It quoted Kinkaid directly. It described temples, idols, even mummified remains. But just as quickly as it appeared, the story vanished. Copies of the newspaper were pulled from circulation. The editor who published it reportedly resigned days later. By then, Kinkaid had disappeared. Some said he returned to the canyon to prove his discovery again. Others whispered that the Smithsonian had relocated him, and the truth, to ensure no one ever followed his trail. Officially, the Smithsonian denied the expedition ever took place. No records, no funding logs, no employee named Professor S.A. Jordan, the supposed archaeologist assigned to verify Kinkaid's claims. When a journalist asked about the story in 1947, the Smithsonian's response was blunt. We have found no evidence that such a discovery was ever made, nor that any explorer named G.E. Kinkaid was in our employ, and yet photos of the Arizona Gazette article still circulated. Copies of Kinkaid's field letters appeared in private collections, and in one Smithsonian archive log, long since declassified, a line was found, dated April 1909, delivery received. Copper artifacts from canyon excavation. Storage reference to C11872, restricted access. That entry was later crossed out in thick black ink, but it was too late. The silence had already become the loudest sound in American archaeology. The sound of something buried, not by time, but by choice. Kinkaid's name was erased from the records. His discovery dismissed as a hoax. The canyon sealed off under new, restricted zones. Yet among those who had read his letters, a few explorers, journalists, even military surveyors, the legend persisted. They called it the hidden empire beneath America, a secret so profound it could rewrite human history, if only someone could find it again. More than a century after G.E. Kinkaid vanished, the Grand Canyon still guards its secrets. Tourists come for the sunsets and the silence, unaware that beneath their feet may rest one of history's most extraordinary enigmas. In 2019, a team of independent researchers led by Dr. Eleanor Voss, a geologist with a taste for controversy, launched a private expedition to a restricted sector known as the Marble Rift. Her goal wasn't treasure, it was truth. The area had long been off limits, fenced by the National Park Service and patrolled by drones under the pretext of environmental protection. But satellite scans told a different story. Beneath the sandstone layers, strange geometric voids appeared, symmetrical, massive, and aligned like corridors. Exactly where Kinkaid's coordinates would have placed his discovery, the team moved under cover of darkness, hauling equipment through the rocky gulch. The air smelled of dust and iron, and every gust of wind carried the canyon's ancient whisper. On the third night, one of the scanners malfunctioned. The signal jammed for 12 seconds, then returned showing a faint pulsing glow from deep within the rock, as if something metallic was still humming far below. Voss stared at the screen. "Either it's an error," she said, "or it's still alive." When they lowered a probe into a narrow fissure, the camera caught a fleeting glimpse, smooth carved walls reflecting a golden shimmer. Then the feed cut to black. Back at camp, the team reviewed the footage, frame by frame. For an instant, a symbol flashed across the lens, an unfamiliar sigil, circular and complex. Later comparison revealed it matched a drawing found in Kinkaid's recovered notebook. The next morning before dawn, park authorities arrived. They claimed a drone had detected unauthorized excavation. The researchers' equipment was seized, their footage confiscated for analysis. Dr. Voss returned home empty-handed, her expedition officially discredited. Yet 2 months later, she received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single photo, the same sigil glowing faintly against stone, and a line written in pencil beneath it. "They are waking now." No one knows who sent it. No one knows how the image escaped government custody. Today, if you hike near the Marble Rift at night, locals say you can sometimes feel a vibration through the ground, steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The rangers dismiss it as seismic activity. But the older guides, the ones who've lived their whole lives along the canyon's edge, tell a different story. They say the earth remembers. That once, long before the United States existed, something vast slept beneath the desert. And maybe, just maybe, it's beginning to stir again. Dr. Voss never returned to the canyon, but in a recent interview, her last before vanishing from public view, she left one chilling remark. Kinkaid wasn't the first to find them. He was the last to leave alive. As the sun dips behind the red cliffs, the shadows stretch long, swallowing the paths once carved by explorers and dreamers. The wind hums through the gorge, carrying with it a low, hollow resonance. Not quite sound, not quite silence. Perhaps it's nothing. Or perhaps it's the echo of a civilization forgotten, calling softly from the depths of America's heart.